Hello, and welcome back to another episode of Critical Reactions with your host, Bryan. Now, I guess I'm not the usual host. I'm sitting here in editor Bryan role, and I had uploaded this album, and I realized there was an audio issue. For some reason, the music was coming through doubled and delayed, so it's kind of unlistenable. So I've had to do some editing magic behind the scenes to get it to a state that works as a reaction, but I lost my comments during the reactions themselves. The analysis segments are fine, but during the reactions, you're not going to be able to hear me. I have put up, though, subtitles for all 45 comments I made during the 9 tracks, I think, that are in here. So you're still going to get the information. It's just it'll be like a silent film in a sense that you'll be syncing up the subtitles with my lips moving, or you can just read them and not really worry about timing it to how I'm saying it or my cadence at all. Yeah, I feel like that's enough of an intro here. Let's get into the album reaction here and check out Nornír's Skuld. I think we've had Nornir on the channel before. We're going to be looking at the entire Skuld album. Let's just dive into it, right? I mean, I guess there's a chance it isn't black metal. I'm like 70% sure. We have a 1-minute opening here that leads into a 4-minute track 2. I'm just going to run both of those together. Let's dive in. See what Nornir is bringing to the table today. started to grab me a little bit there at the end. Not particularly something I'd go out of my way to listen to, but it started to click a little bit. For whatever reason, it reminded me of like a mid-80s, kind of lower budget fantasy film. And I was like, okay, I can kind of get behind this now. You know, it's like if someone saw, I say fantasy, I mean more of like Conan, the Barbarian. I mean, maybe I guess there's some fantastical elements to that, but that's what it feels like. But like someone watched that and they're like, oh, you know, I want to make that kind of film, but then like they didn't have the budget for it. And you kind of get something that's full of heart and passion, but you know, a little cheesy because the special effects or even the practical effects just weren't up to the vision. And I think that's kind of what I got here. Not necessarily that it sounds cheap, but that it sounds B-flick in like the best of ways. But it's also this feeling of like adventure there at the end, which I was kind of getting into it. But the rest of the track just never grabbed me. And I think this is probably where a lot of people, because you know I love my post-hardcore, I love my pop rock, my pop emo. People listen to that and they might listen to a few bands and they're like, dude, they all sound the same, you know. But once you get closer to it, you can hear the nuance, the subtle differences. All the bands are doing their own thing. I haven't reached that point with black metal, so the first, I don't know, 2.5, 3 minutes of this track just sound like melodic black metal, like any band could have written this. I'm curious if black metal fans feel that same way, or if this is just something that I'm not close enough to understand the differences. Because of course, you know, I do listen to a lot of iterative music too. Stuff that doesn't sound unique within the genre. Sounds like some other band, but I really like that sound, so I'm cool with this iterative writing. Not everyone needs to reinvent the wheel, you know? And I'm wondering where this lies. Because I've listened to a lot of black metal over the 6 years that I've been doing this. I am certainly more of a professor of black metal today than I was when I started this. And honestly, I think as far as non-black metal listeners go, I might be one of the best analyzers of the genre. I know what it does well, and I have a pretty good idea of what the general sound of it is and what different bands are doing within that sound. But I've never gotten over this hurdle where it actually sounds different, aside from, you know, post black metal or fifth wave black metal or experimental black metal. You know, the bands who are taking black metal as a jumping off board and kind of using elements of it while exploring other genres, or exploring other genres and sometimes peppering in some of the harsh sounds in black metal. Stuff that's I would describe as black metal adjacent. That's where I really start to hear differences. And I've said this before, and I always feel bad about it. I just don't know what I can add to the conversation on this track in particular, because I don't really feel that I hear much difference in it than hundreds of other black metal tracks out there. There's nothing in here that really feels unique, but I know a part of that is skill issue. I still don't really feel too much of an emotion to this. Maybe that's our first topic here. The first 3 minutes of this sound aggressive. It has a nice bite to the harmonic quality. There is a bit of darkness. I don't know if it's animosity. I don't know if it's fear. I don't know if it's danger, but there is a dark edge to a lot of this track. And that's kind of it. Much like death metal, it just kind of sounds generically aggressive to me. They both have their own brand. Death metal doesn't sound like black metal, but as far as emotion goes and my relationship to the sounds used in these, they kind of hit the same idea. It's an aggressive sound, but I don't hear emotional development. Whereas if you give me a handful of different pop tracks or classical tracks or jazz tracks, I really get more nuance in the harmonic delivery in these to feel different emotions throughout a track or to differentiate tracks. And I just don't really get that too much in metal. Metal in general, honestly, doom metal kind of falls under the same thing. A lot of it just sounds very samey to me. So I get this general aggression in this track. There are a couple of cool harmonies. There's some sick riffs in here, 100%, but I don't connect with the track beyond every once in a while saying, oh, okay, that was kind of a slick idea right there. But let me get to the end. And I mentioned it's a feeling of adventure here. I thought this was pretty cool because I don't hear adventure too much in black metal. It almost started to deviate a little bit into, what is that, power metal? I don't think it ever went full cheese like power metal can do, but it started to lean into that element a little bit. And I thought it worked really well. In fact, blackened power metal, I might be able to get behind that. If anyone's got recommendations for that, if any bands tried to do that in the past, I'm down to give it a try. Let me know what's up. I think that would work really well because power metal is very focused on harmonic storytelling. And I think that's black metal's weakness, personally. And so bringing that harmonic exploration into black metal sounds, that might actually work. I talk a lot on this channel about merging genres for complementary ideas. So basically, if you have two genres and you're trying to smash them together, take the Venn diagrams, put them together, see what happens in the overlap. And that's really what you should be focusing on if you're trying to merge these well. But I don't really ever think about the opposite there, about correcting weaknesses. I put both of those in quotations because correcting music implies there's something wrong with it, and weakness is subjective. So I don't think it's actually a proper term to use in this context, but I think it conveys the idea that if a genre kind of has difficulty doing one specific thing, like pop music doesn't really sound heavy most of the time. I think it's really hard to make a pop track that sounds heavy. So if you wanted that, you'd probably want to mix it with metal, and pop metal works really well. So, that's definitely one way to go about smashing genres together. And I think power blackened metal or blackened power metal, I think that'd be pretty cool. Anyways, back to this. The problem is that once we got to it and I started to finally get into the harmonic gist, the track was over. I'm hoping that the rest of the album works on that better. This is the shortest track by far. We have a couple of more 1-minute songs in here. Actually, it looks like the intro, which we checked, 1:40. Then we have an interlude at 1:44, right in the middle of the album at track 5. And then the outro is 1.5 minutes. So we kind of have the start, the middle, and the end. And then the other 6 tracks are full traditional length. This one being the shortest at 4.5, but then our next 2 are both 7:15. We have 6.5 for 6 and 7, and then almost 9 for track 8. So I'm hoping that we're not going to have any pacing issues with those, given that this song really felt like it could have been just a hair bit longer and would have allowed the music to expand a little bit. Though, maybe there's also an artistic reason for it, or a thematic reason to have cut this so short, and we'll explore that when we hit the lyrics. Maybe it makes sense for this to have ended as soon as it started to become adventurous. Now, on the topic of expansion, this song does a really good job of taking a riff, exploring it a lot, and then putting a twist on it, a little spin. Maybe we'll put harmony on it. Maybe we'll raise it up a third or half of an octave. We'll raise it to the fifth. We'll do some harmonic movements on it. Interval changes. Maybe we'll add in a little bit of flourish. Maybe it was only, focusing on 4 notes. Now we're going to make it 6 or 8. We're going to change notes, twice as quickly here. Same span of time, more notes peppered in there. So even with the drum work, and this is actually pretty typical for a lot of black metal, where there's a constant ramping up, where maybe the drummer will focus on quarter notes, and then eighth notes, and then 16th notes. So you get the same general beat, the same general rhythm, but the intensity of it constantly escalates. But we see this same evolution mindset and composition style on the guitar work as well here. I had mentioned that it's kind of littered all over the place, and every single riff in here ends up getting an expanded form of it. But I never really found that it was transformative, which isn't a bad thing, but for someone trying to find some extra depth in the music, I found I was a little underwhelmed by some of the variations that we heard on the guitar riffs. Most of this comes down to the fact that it is an expansion in that it adds more ideas, but it doesn't actually change up the vibe, the storytelling, the emotion, or anything like that. It's more of a technical expansion where we were focusing on quarter notes, and now we've added in some eighth notes, and now we've added in some extra notes. But the key tones in the chord progression, the notes that have emphasis in this melodic passage don't change. There isn't a challenging of harmony where maybe we have different note intervals or notes that are combined in ways that they weren't previously. Anything to alter the atmosphere at all. So I do think it's cool. I'm a huge fan of theme, variation, set up a motif, and then give me a new version of it. I talk about this type of contrast all the time. I love it. It's a subtle change, but it greatly elevates music. But it doesn't transform anything here. And that just left me a little underwhelmed. Though again, that's a personal, subjective thing. If you're already enjoying this, getting more of it, but different, is probably fantastic. But as usual, black metal it's just not my cup of tea, which is probably a funny thing to say if y'all checked out my album of the year video earlier today and you saw 4 black metal adjacent albums on it. But I suppose, again, it's adjacent. It's the more experimental stuff. This is a very pure black metal sound, which, well, I suppose on the one hand, it isn't fatiguing to listen to anymore. It's not overwhelming like it used to be. But as I've mentioned, I wish I could remember what video that was. It was sometime in 2025. Black metal it doesn't grab me anymore. And I kind of wish I was still overwhelmed by it, because at least that is a feeling towards it. But I'm just kind of numb to the general sound of black metal these days. I'm kind of saddened by that. It's kind of weird, right? But I am. All right. Let me hit some lyrics on this. All right. Now, this is a German band, but this song is sung in Norwegian. So that's kind of interesting. As usual, Metal Archives has my back for lyrics. Every time that there's especially black metal, that I can't find the lyrics on Genius, Metal Archives has them. I did have to use Google Translate though, since there wasn't any hand-translated version of this. Black metal and nihilism, right? Name a more iconic duo. Nothing is worth living. Nothing can exist anymore. Nothing has a reason to survive. Nothing shall live any longer. Now I wonder if there's wordplay that I'm missing here. Is nothing a thing? Is it the concept of nothing? Or are we just literally saying that life isn't worth it? and that everything dies in the end, so why not get there immediately? I don't know, it's something about the way it's phrased. Maybe it's the way I said it. A lot of emphasis on the term nothing. Anyways, though, it says that we're on a crusade through the world until the last light is extinguished. The darkness is called and it is coming. Nothing shall live and everything shall burn. Then I will have my peace and the darkness is only mine. Yeah. I don't know if this is like an apocalyptic thing where the world is ending, or if this is just simply stating that darkness as maybe a metaphor for death will take everyone. The concept that no one is excluded from this, and that they'll only find peace in the darkness where nothing lives. It does talk about a crusade, though. Is our narrator a crusader of light or a crusader of night? They do say that they will have peace in the darkness, which makes me think that they would not crusade against the darkness, in which case we have somebody spreading death across the world. And, well, yeah, black metal kind of lines up with that too, but I try not to lean into stereotypes too often when talking about music, and especially lyrics. Just because black metal tends to be or has a high frequency of nihilistic bands doesn't mean they all are. But that is kind of how I lean on this side of lyrics. I don't know how that lines up with the music. I mean, the music is kind of dark. It's got that bite that black metal has, but the end was a bit adventurous. And maybe the adventure was heading into the darkness, finding that peace. Maybe the abrupt end was about finding the peace, a bit of silence at the end of the track. I couldn't find lyrics for the first one, though. There's definitely words sung there. And I guess we didn't talk about that, but I didn't have much to add until I read this, and we have this concept of crusades, and the first track started with marching. Yeah, that's about all I got for that one. It sets the mood, and I guess is thematically relevant to what we would see in track 2, but beyond that, it's just a cool way to start the song off, or start the album off, I suppose. We're going to dive into track 3 here, called Hell's Postulate. This one is 7:15. Let's kick it. All right. So listening to that track actually reminded me a little bit of a conversation that was happening in the Discord server a couple of days ago, um, where people were talking about musical elitism and how a lot of us, me included, kind of had musical elitism when we were younger. What we listened to wasn't necessarily mainstream, and we were enlightened because, we we liked music that was real music and not just the popular fluff out there. And if people would only listen to the music that we were listening to, they'd instantly hear how great it is. Um, and yeah. One of the things that came up though, and I wish I could remember who stated this so I could credit them, but they had mentioned that they kind of had an eye-opening experience when they played one of their favorite songs or a song they really liked for friends, and the friend was like, nah, that bounces right off of me. And after discussing it more, it was a realization that their friend listened for very different qualities in music for enjoyment purposes than the person who was telling this anecdote. And I think that's a really good thing to remember, particularly with a situation like this where I'm not really gelling with this. There's some parts in it. I like that song a lot more than track 2, and we'll get into why in a second. But this is a riff heavy song, and a lot of metal is, and I've talked about this in the past. I'm not really a riff guy. A riff has to be stellar to grab me and make me want to just listen to it over and over and over. Even when we listen to, some of y'all have thrown out Bolt Thrower as just this phenomenal riff machine band. All their riffs are great. And I mean, yeah, we've checked out some Bolt Thrower in the past. They're good. Their riffs are solid. But I'm not a riff person. Riffs alone aren't going to make a song for me. And this is a very riff heavy song. And I think this is one of the reasons why me and metal just don't groove too much. Like I would never consider myself a metalhead despite enjoying some metal, because it is a riff-based genre. And I'm not a riff-based listener. I'm there for story. I'm there for development. It's not about the moment, it's about the grand scheme. It's about the emotive delivery. It's about the atmosphere and the textures and what your melodies are doing. And metal just doesn't always do that. And particularly something like this. The emotion doesn't really change too much throughout this song. It's pretty static in that regard. But the riffs, they're constantly being thrown at you. They're being developed, expanded on, passed around. Are they cool riffs? Maybe. Again, it's hard for me to judge riffs because I'm not usually that drawn to them, but there are some cool ones in here. None that would make me want to listen to them on repeat as we had. I mean, I mentioned 2.5 minutes into this track, the guitarists were still playing that one riff. The bassist was still playing that one riff. We had the lead melody riff on top of that twice up to that point. But the supporting guitars, they had been doing the same thing for 150 seconds. That to me is too static. Even if the riff itself is constant 16th notes, even if there is movement to it, even if it does have that cool descending arpeggio that I did like in that, it's just too much of it. And this is just one of those situations where you got to remember that different people listen to music for different things. Some people just really love riffs. And I can see why people would appreciate this album. Why would they would be drawn or gravitated towards it. Also, if you're hearing that, I apologize. There's going to be some sounds of power tools in the background every now and then. I don't know when it'll be over. But yeah, while I was listening to this, I was like, dude, this is riff heavy. And I was like, oh yeah, some people like riffs. Like, it's just not something I think about. And I think it's very poignant for that conversation to just happen. You know, I happen to have been part of it and reading it the other day. It's really good to keep in mind, though, in situations like this. Now, on the topic of the riffs, though, yeah, there's some development on this one. As I mentioned, that first riff we heard for a long time, but we actually got to hear a variation of it around 4.5 or 5 minutes into the track too. There was a rhythmic variation while retaining the same general vibe of play two notes, hold that second note, and then have a cool little descending arpeggiation before having a bit of movement to push us back into those two notes that the second one holds out. So you kind of have this push and pull going on there. Yeah, you have the 16th notes. You have the sort of galloped idea on the second time we get through this idea. So you have this rhythmic movement, but note-wise, it's push and pull. You sit on one note for a long time, and then you have a lot of movement. And then you sit on one note for a long time, then you have a lot of movement. So it does create this pushing and pulling vibe throughout it. But we do have all that variation too. So I think that's pretty cool. Right before this section, the rhythm guitars, I call them rhythm guitars because they're not the centered solo guitar, but I mean, they're not playing chords. They're not rhythm. They're just like supporting guitar, I guess we can call them, but they are lead at some points. I don't know. It's tough because most bands would say, oh, we have a solo guitar. Let everyone else is going to play chords. And this one's like, nah, you keep playing your melodic riffs over here. We're just going to put another melody on top of it. And generally, I think that works. We'll get to that in a second. Cool. There's some cool counterpoint going on. But just before that, the guitars out to the side were playing a variation on those four notes that the lead guitar plays throughout almost every time they come on. So we have this baton passing there where we have a melodic idea on one instrument that gets passed to others, and then they also modify it to better accommodate what they've been doing and what they're doing with their riffs. But even within this lead guitar line, it starts off playing four notes. Then it shifts to six. I had mentioned we have 1, 2, transition note to 3, and then transition note to 4. This gives it a little bit more movement. This is that variation I was talking about where they take something, they add to it, they modify it, they change it into something else, but it doesn't transform it. We haven't messed with the key tones. We still land on all four of those notes on downbeats. There's still the key feeling. It hasn't altered the emotion, but it has technically increased the complexity of that line. So I do think it's cool that this band focuses around these ideas of variations on themes. I mean, for a 7-minute song, I can't really say I was too bored at any given time. There's always something developing, but honestly, I think there's like 3 riffs on this whole track. 3 core riffs, that get expanded upon or passed to other instruments or diversified or have rhythmic changes to them. There's always evolution happening. And I've talked about this in the past. I think that is incredibly efficient writing. This is the way to write music because it keeps everything together, keeps it cohesive. You can see how ideas evolve, where they came from, but you also get the sense of growth too. And movement. It doesn't feel static, despite the fact that, honestly, you're just working with 3 ideas here. And I love that. Now, I want to bring this up because last track we had some heavy drum work. We had double bass kicks. We had blast beats. Very traditional black metal stuff. It did ramp down every once in a while, but I feel like the heightened drumming was the core idea on track 2. Not so much here. This drumming is... well, it's still strict. Downbeats. Always accenting downbeats. You got to really lean into that. It creates the rigidity that I associate with black metal. But not a lot of blast beats on here. 16th note bass kicks. Yeah, we got some of those in here. But it's kind of chill. It's kind of a human metronome, which honestly, when you think about it, blast beats and 16th note bass kicks, all of the rigid temporal things that drummers tend to do in black metal, yeah, it's just subdivided metronomes. I think this is the most complex, the drummer's just the metronome of the band, that style drumming that I've ever heard. And I don't know why I've never made that connection, but that's exactly what it is. It's impressive, but it does kind of come down to just being this human machine of keeping time in a way that more expressive or rhythmically dynamic drumming doesn't always feel like. But here, we kind of take things down a level. The attacks are heavy. Hitting that snare, that's a big sound. But it's just not a lot. And I think it allows the song to kind of lose a little bit of intensity, which I think is a good thing. When I listen to the guitars and I listen to the melodies and the counterpoint of them and the ways that they're working around and within each other, when we get the guitar idea in the center and it's playing around the guitar ideas over here, yes, they're all playing 16th notes for the most part, but they're changing notes at different times, and that creates the illusion of rhythmic changes, where everyone isn't just shifting on these predefined moments. There's a little bit of variability to it. But above all of that, there's the counterpoint. There's all of these notes, sometimes harmonies in these two guitars, sometimes those are providing harmony to this one, sometimes we have proper triads in this track. We have harmonic information being developed around moving melodic devices. There's a lot of focus here on notes. The lighter drumming makes room for the harmonic and melodic elements to be experienced. And while, to me, I still mostly just hear metal out of all of this, I do think it's worth pointing out that a lot of the black metal we listen to, particularly in the mid to lo-fi production styles, are all about the sound. It's the noise. It's the wall of the 16th notes from all the instruments. Yeah, they might be playing some sick riffs, but it isn't always necessarily in the forefront. It isn't always necessarily the purpose of the production to accentuate that. And I love how everything is clear here. Even when there's blast beats, the production does a good job of balancing everything, but particularly in the composition here, where the drummer says, yeah, even if I were playing blast beats, the purpose is still to keep time. I'm just subdividing every beat in 4 and locking into that. But the guitars are the heart of this track. Let me just back off a little bit and allow them to flourish. And I kind of like that perspective for building black metal. And I know a lot of melodic black metal is based around this. Even more atmospheric black metal in the mid to hi-fi production styles are built like this. But something about it here just really works. And I think it's because the guitar work is so strong. Now, I know that might be a little confusing. Let me clarify that a little bit. I mentioned that I'm not a riff person. Generally, though, the first time I hear most of the guitar lines in here, I enjoy it. They usually have nice directionality to them. The melodic movement is kind of cool at times. The lead guitar just being 4 notes kind of threw me off, but that lead guitar line, or the lead guitar, ends up getting some cool riffs forward or toward the end of the track anyways. Those were really cool. Most of the riffs have cool little ideas in them. My issue comes down to building the entire track off of these short loops and kind of getting tired of that. But generally speaking, I enjoy the riff on the first time through. I just wish that instead of repeating after the 8 bars or whatever, it continued to grow. But I do think that the riff writing on this is strong in the sense that it makes me want more. I'm upset that it gets repeated because I want to hear how it develops. And so I do get pulled in the first time I hear a riff. On both of these tracks so far, I'm like, yeah, dude, this is kind of cool. The repetition gets me, but I'm there at the first time. And it's because they're so melodically strong. There's cool movements in them. There's also, unfortunately, a lot of static moments. This track in particular loved to just sit on a note for a long time, whether it was the side guitars or the main guitar. It did that way too much. This song ended up feeling incredibly static because those ideas made up a bulk of the riffs, and the riffs were very heavily repeated, and it sounded like a song that was just stuck in one point for a lot of time, and this is that push and pull feeling. Maybe the lyrics lean into this, but I will say on the audio level, those moments kind of pushed me away as a listener. But going back to the drums and the composition and all that, I do feel like the drummer gets out of the way at times in order for the guitars to flourish, and they have strong ideas. They absolutely deserve to have that space in the mix. So that's pretty cool. The last thing I want to touch on before we head into the lyrics then is going to be the vocals. I completely slept on them the first time around. There is a great bit of pitched variety there, almost to the point that it sounds like there's singing to it, almost as if it's incredibly distorted. Cleans? No, there's nothing about this that really sounds clean other than pitch selection. Usually that comes from having compressed cleans, so you get the grit and the pitch, but if you're not using your vocal cords at all, which is how most harsh vocals are produced, you don't get pitch. You get the illusion of pitch based on how all of the sound waves are clashing together, and the overtones and undertones of them can create a semblance of pitch, and it can sound like you're raising or lowering your pitch with your harshes, but this almost sounds melodic at times. There was one point, and it was when I pointed it out in the reaction, so like 3-4 minutes in, 4 distinct notes in an escalating pattern. Kind of blows my mind. I got to pay more attention to the vocalist kind of knowing that they can do this, but it does add a lot of variety to the vocal work, rather than using a sort of monotone. You have your pitch, you always hit it, this is just the sound you use while you're using your harsh vocal. Those type of vocals, they lack contrast, they lack dynamics, they just don't click with me too well, but I was really enjoying this. They're certainly black metal. That last one, the high pitch one, kind of screechy. So not necessarily the texture I prefer in harsh vocals, but the variety and the feeling of rising and falling movement, almost bringing a melodic quality to the harsh vocals, is incredibly impressive. And despite that last note kind of being high pitched and screechy, it did work at conveying the emotion of whatever they were saying in this line becoming overwhelming and just having to lean into a wild, inhuman sound to present it. I mean, I've talked about in the past, I really love the idea of harsh vocals being used to convey extreme emotion. And if you kind of have a range of harshes that you kind of use the majority of the time, and then some extremer sounds to push into for heightened moments in the lyrics, you're going to grab me that way. You're going to hit me with the emotionality of the harshes. Something I've talked about in the past is that the monotone harsh vocals sort of just become a sound of the song, a drone that's going on, something that becomes background noise against more dynamic elements in the song. And I don't have as strong of an emotional connection to vocalists who do harsh vocals like this. But this is absolutely going to grab me. This is dynamic. This is expressive. This has highs and lows. This has contrast to it. I'm very intrigued about their technique and how they came about doing this. I mean, I know that the general technique around pitched harshes is the shape of the mouth and widening or closing both the mouth cavity and your lips, which for some reason changes perceived pitch. I don't know the science behind it, but I know that works. Is that all that's going on here? And if so, why don't other vocalists do this if it's that easy? I don't know. This sounds pretty cool though. So I'm definitely going to be paying more attention to the vocalist moving forward from here. Let's dive into some lyrics. Going back to language, the first track was in Norwegian, but I had mentioned there are German bands. This one is mostly in English, but the final two lines are in German. Very interesting to see a trilingual album, at least so far. We're only 2 tracks in for lyrics. It's quite possible that there's more languages on the album. Despite being a 7-minute song, though, not a lot of lyrics here. There are 6 2-line couplets. That's it. And it talks about the philosophical angle of the price or the worth of a life and what makes existence justified. I think this lines up with the idea of the war. As track 2 mentioned, there is a war cry and there's a crusade of darkness coming across the world. This one seems to be about a narrator who is on the verge of taking the life of another combatant. It says, "Shall I regret taking thy life? An existence purer than mine. Still, I don't defy the nature of my kind. Thou shalt be praised and sacrificed. This world, it's resigned, doomed to witness. Dost thou ask if thine death bears a greater relevance? Dost thou ask for sense? Yet which right hallows my life, and which end justifies my existence?" Maybe it's not even a fellow combatant here. It says that it's their nature, and they will be praised for committing this murder here. But it also says that the other person's life is purer than theirs. I wonder if they're looking at that as, they're taking the life of a regular person, not in this war of light versus dark, but just a casualty of the war, someone who's never murdered anyone else, hence making their life more pure. In which case, I think it paints a rather negative, moralistic viewpoint of our narrator here, assuming that it's the same narrator from track 2 and 3. But they wonder what makes their life worthwhile, what makes their existence justified. And after stating this, in German, they mention the world is pain, the world is suffering, and kind of taking a rather nihilistic view on this. There are no morals. At the end of the day, if you believe there's nothing after this world, you simply exist, do what you do, and then cease to exist. And as he mentions, it's the nature of humanity to murder. It's hard to argue with that. Going back to some of our earliest days of Homo sapiens, violence has been a big part of human existence. And even today, apathy and violence towards others continues to be expressed. So maybe it is human nature to kill. Maybe that's all this world is: pain, suffering, and then death. Or at least that's what this track expresses. I think I've gone on too many rants about the nihilistic point of view and how it clashes with my own experience of existence. So I'm not going to do it here. You can go look at pretty much any other recent black metal album reaction. I don't gel with this mindset, man. I really don't. We're going to move on to the next track, Dedicated to the Night. Really seems like we're locking on to this theme of a person within Night's army sweeping across the lands and murdering everyone, which is the favorite thing I like to be listening to on an album review. It brings joy. No, I can't even be sarcastic about this. Let's dive into Dedicated to the Night.
The ice winds of the North howl. Winter will soon arise.
That last pitch was crazy. Almost sound like there's some whistle tone under there too. I need to maybe ask the Discord. We have a little section in the Discord server called Music Search, and you basically say, "Hey, I like this song," or I'm looking for this rhythm or whatever, and people can suggest stuff for you. And I think there's been very few, maybe zero requests that haven't had something come back that was a really great find. The community has just a massive knowledge of music combined, so it's really cool um, to see that the cooperation of finding music for each other. And I kind of want to see if I can get a list of vocalists who do that whistle screaming thing, because this gets thrown, this vocalist gets thrown in that pile, but I don't know too many others who do it. There was one recently, and I'm completely blanking out on who it was. It was a reaction though. And then there's Maria Brink from In This Moment. And that's kind of about it. I don't think I can think of anyone. Oh, you know what? I forget her name, but she sings for Seven Spires. I think I've heard her do it a couple of times. Although hers feels a bit more controlled, like it's an operatic style vocal that is compressed, like trying to do harsh vocals through whatever muscle manipulations typically used for more operatic vocals. It doesn't quite have the same texture, but it does kind of fit the same realm. But I also have to like look into this. I keep telling myself I'm going to do this. Let me make a note. I have to figure out if whistle screaming is even a real thing. Like it's just a term I came up with because it sounds like the compression of screams with like that really thin, perfect tone. I don't know if that's the best way to describe it. It's very full bodied. It's not very airy. It's like this piercing pitch that exists alongside, or maybe even through the center of all of the compression, all of the clashing together of the sound waves from the harsh vocals. And it kind of sounds like a really clear whistle in the middle of the scream. But it's always super high pitched. But I don't know, like maybe there's a term for that. Maybe it's not called a whistle scream, but that's what I want to call it. Oh, my marker's running out of ink. But yeah, I got to see if I can put a document. Who else knows about this? How many other vocalists do this? I want to put that together. This one goes in the stack though. This vocalist has that range at times, and that last note, it just pierces, man. And that's what I'm talking about, the emotionality of having the variety in the vocals, because you can build into, or even in this case, leap up to that really big interval shift in order to hit that note and put this punctuating note at the end of the track, like an exclamation point, like this is it. This is the finale. I was gonna say finality. This is the end of the song. Like you put that mark at the end, and being able to hit that note, being able to increase the intensity of your vocals, even in harsh, that's the way to do it. All right, there's two things I want to bring up on this one, because otherwise, I mean, the drum pattern's pretty fun, but I don't have any expanded analysis to put to that. I just really like fun rhythmic cymbal stuff in black metal, because usually you don't get that fun rhythmic stuff anywhere else. It's always a cymbal. But yeah, so it's just your snare, your bass locking in, constant 16th notes, constant quarter notes, and then this ta 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 on the bell of the cymbal. It just sounds so good. And it brings some levity and, dare I say, some danceability to these black metal tracks. But that's all I have to add to that. It's a cool addition. I'd like to hear more of it. But I only have two other things I want to bring up on this that I think are, they're not really specific to this song. I apologize if you wanted to know more about why this song in particular works, but I think it just kind of follows the pattern that we've seen on the previous two tracks, and pretty much everything I would say covers all of them. Nothing really specific to this one. The first, though, is the lack of silence. Oftentimes, people who try to gently ease me into black metal will give me some tracks with rising and falling action. Maybe, ooh, you know what though? Those are rarely melodic black metal. That tends to be atmospheric black metal, where they continue to build the atmosphere just with no distortion, or maybe even acoustic guitars for, a minute, maybe even sometimes less than a minute before getting back into the metal. But have I heard melodic black metal that also gives me those dips? Nothing springing to mind. So maybe this is a bit more typical than I was expecting. There's no dips on this. Every song is at, we'll call it like an 8 to 10, because there is some intensity variation. The drums can shift from 16th notes into bass kick on 2 and 4, snare on 1 and 3, and kind of go for something a bit more basic like that. So we do get some of that right here in this track, actually. For a brief moment, the first time in this album, we stopped playing the 16th notes on the guitar and just played the riff, allowing only to pick note changes. So if the note doesn't change, it just rings out. That was a bit of an intensity drop, and I think that's the closest we've seen on this album to having any sort of dip. Most of the time, it's a slight reduction of intensity, usually coming at us from the drums. But it gives the album a rather consistent vibe. This is an album about night coming through and taking everyone out. And due to the consistency and regularity of this darkness war, the music matches that vibe by never really taking a rest either. It is constant. It is uniform throughout most of what we've heard so far. And the album is half done. I don't know about time-wise, but the next track is our mid-track interval. We're going to run that right into track 6 there. And we only have 3 more breaks on here. We're going to do 5 and 6 together, and then 7, and then 8 and 9, because 9's only a 1-minute outro. We only have 3 more analysis moments for this. It's the halfway point. And it's consistent. I expect the whole album to be consistent like this. To just constantly run at peak intensity. We might have little dips taking us down from that 10 to an 8 or something, but the riffs don't really let up. The screams, we don't get cleans in here. We don't get lighter harshes. You're either screaming or there's no vocals at all. And usually in those cases, we have an electric guitar come in to fill that space anyways with its own flavor of intensity. Now, I do like that on this album, though, where the vocals and the lead guitar kind of trade off. You're going to get one or the other, and between them, usually to separate space out, we're going to hear just the side guitars with the core riff. Sometimes it'll introduce a new riff that the solo is going to play over. Sometimes we don't get that introduction at all. We just head straight into the next idea. The vocals we're singing, the guitar has it now. But it's a really nice back and forth on there. And one, good contrast. You have harshes, which is mostly texture. And then you have the guitar, which is mostly melody. Nice back and forth on the two of them. So once again, despite being really static in atmosphere, it's little changes everywhere that keep the songs feeling interesting. Honestly, I mean, we're halfway done with this album, so we're probably about 20 minutes in or so. I don't hate it, but I'm also not bored. And I think that's really important because black metal albums have a tendency to really wear me down, especially around the midpoint to the end of the album, if they're rather uniform in their execution like this album has been. And I haven't really had that issue. I don't dislike it. I don't love it, but I don't dislike it either. It's fine. The riffs are solid. I enjoy hearing the new riffs. Every time a new one comes in, I kind of perk up my ears. What are they going to do this time? There's a nice melodic element to all the guitar writing. It's just, it never crosses the realm into what I enjoy in music. It sort of sits right on that cusp of listenability, but not something I would seek out. Which, for black metal, for me to say it's listenable, that's high praise. There's only a few bands that I'm like, this is black metal I would actually put on myself. So, I mean, this is almost cream of the crop for me. Really good choice with this album, and I think a lot of it boils down to the dynamic qualities and the focus on melodic riff writing over atmospheric. I don't know what it is with atmospheric black metal. It's easier to get involved with the emotion, but dang, those albums just typically bore me. They have nothing going on in them. It's all vibes, and yeah, dude. But you know what? Vibey black metal with some clean vocals, I could probably get into that. I need a bone somewhere thrown towards me. If you're going atmospheric, give me some clean melodies. If you're going melodic like this, give me some longer linear melody writing. Or like I mentioned earlier, just give me some more interesting harmonies. Every track on this album has had the same emotional vibes. And that's kind of wearing me down a little too. I feel like black metal was probably fine at one point in time. And then one group went in the atmospheric direction and the other went in the melodic direction, and they lost the balance. And I don't think I'm a big fan of either of these in separation and isolation, but you put them together, that's where that black metal stuff gets me. Good atmosphere, engaging emotion, solid melody writing. Too many bands are only focusing on half the equation. I think that's the problem. This one could use a little bit more atmosphere, I suppose. I mean, unless you really enjoy just this one sound, which, like I said before, there's some bands I enjoy that just do one sound, but it's just, it's not black metal. It's a sound I like. So if you're enjoying this, absolutely, that's awesome, dude. I'm not telling you this is bad. It's just, I'm not the audience for it. I don't know how we got here from a lack of intensity contrast, but yeah, that's been pretty consistent. It's just an album that does its thing all the time and very rarely deviates from that. I have been paying attention to the riffs, though. I had mentioned that a lot of these riffs are based around variation. Start with an idea, expand on it, change some stuff, give it to another instrument, change the pitch, bring everything up a third or something. Little variations like that. There's something else, though, another pattern to the riff writing. They tend to be 4-stage riffs. Now, normally I use this nomenclature to talk about song structure. I haven't talked about song structure at all on this track. Not on this album. Honestly, I don't know the song structure to most of these songs. They just sort of evolve where they want to. There's usually a solid, first chorus idea, and then I'm lost for a while, and then we come back to a riff from earlier. I don't know if there's a pattern. I don't know if we're always coming back to a chorus, or if we come back to verses. I don't know. There's exploration, usually expansion of core riffs, and then we're back to a more root, a simpler idea. So I guess in a sense, it probably is something adjacent to first chorus, bridge, something, first or chorus, something close to that ABABCB pattern. I don't know the specifics. Maybe each track is a little different too. It's another way, I suppose, that they keep things listenable and expected while also interesting. Small variations to a norm. Anyways, back to the riffs. A lot of these riffs are written as A, B, A, C. Usually looking at 2 bars per section, which gives us an 8-bar phrase. You get the core part of your riff and then the change to it. And the core part tends to be a longer held out part. We might have da 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 ba ba. No, that's terrible. It's not a black metal idea. But anyways, the second part would be more movement. These are your descending ideas. These are your moving riffs, your swirly ideas. Then you come back to that first section, holding out notes again. But when you come to put the punctuation at the end of that statement, it's different because you're not just transitioning back into it, you're wrapping up this whole idea. And it seems to have a little bit more resolution baked into it, so that if we were to change sections after this, it would feel natural. But also, if we're going to repeat it again, which does happen, that's also going to feel natural. But it doesn't feel like it's pushing forward as much as it's coming to an end. And I think that's really interesting, because when it comes to the realm of modifying these ideas, I find that the B and the C are modified more often than the A. It's almost as if there is a core heart to these riffs that is immutable. Everything else can be modified. In fact, the B and the C tend to be kind of closely related, but different. And they can be further modified for future changes, future iterations of this riff. But it also means they're a bit longer too. One of my complaints with other black metal albums in this more traditional sound is that the riffs are short. It's a very tight loop played over and over and over and over again. And even when we looked at track 2, I think it was, we had like 2.5 minutes of just the opening riff. Was it getting old for me? Yeah, I like a little bit more dynamic writing there. But it's also a rather lengthy riff too. It's not just 1 or 2 bars long, it's 8. It takes time to get through it. It has its own cycles within it, and then the larger cycles of the phrasing too. It creates, once again, a little bit of variability that allow boredom or stagnation to be staved off for a little longer than other bands' riffs would. And I think that's another reason why I'm kind of enjoying this. It isn't getting on my nerves, or I'm not becoming too tired of it like I would other bands. And I've been really trying to figure this out because, I mean, at the end of the day, these 2 7-minute tracks have been based off of 2 or 3 riffs each. There's not a lot of meat here, but they're not boring. They're not pushing me to the brink like some black metal albums do. And I really think a lot of that comes down to their variation, the cycles within the riffs, the length of the riffs. It's about little changes everywhere in order to ensure that it doesn't become stagnant. It's really impressive because it balances complex writing with listenability, and finds something in the middle that is very digestible, but not too static. And I really appreciate that about them. It keeps things sounding interesting, even when they're really only playing 2 riffs. And, you know, I'll give them credit for that. I think that much like pop music, there's a very fine line to walk to create something simple but not boring. And I think this group is doing it very well. Simple is not bad, but boring is. And they're not analogous. Simple music can be engaging. Complex music can be boring. But it is kind of difficult to make something simple and engaging. And I think they're doing it. And that's a tough skill to gain. It's really easy to overdo music. And I think that they're kind of working on a more minimalistic angle while still achieving everything they want in their music. It's impressive. Let me check out some lyrics to this. Dedicated to the Night is entirely in English. I think it's the first track so far that's been entirely in English. It also explores the loneliness of a person who goes through life with nobody around them, describes it as an eternal jail of existence, and becomes aligned with the darkness, still focusing on the negativity of existence. All of this carrying the burden of life until they whisper their last goodbye. Now, there's also the framing of this alongside a winter storm. It says, the ice winds of the north howl, winter will soon arise. There really isn't much else about this. We see these lines come up again later, and then it says that the winter will arise to coat the waters and ground and bury the burdens of life. It starts out as just a cycle, a seasonal cycle, but then focuses on the destructive power of it. I find that interesting. Maybe it's specifically because of a regional thing. I know snow can be destructive, blizzards are incredibly dangerous, but I'm from Florida. Hurricanes, tornadoes, that's the type of nature that I find to be really destructive, as I see them every year. And that comes around late summer, early autumn. Winter, to me, is about the sun going away and actually having some sort of palatable climate for a couple of weeks. So there's definitely a cultural and probably regional thing going on here. And like I mentioned, snow can be very dangerous. But to me, snow is a fun thing that I want to go see more often. I've only seen snow a handful of times in my life. It's not this destructive force, at least not in my mind. But I do think it's really interesting that once again, the winter season is aligned with black metal, because to me, black metal still feels like snow. It's a very black and white, monochromatic style of music in my mind. Now, granted, this album doesn't really put me in that mindset. I think it's because of the wider soundscape, the clearer instrumentation, and the focus on melody rather than atmosphere, where the guitars have character and tone to them. We have multiple guitar tones. That right there is a pretty big deal, rather than just having a lot of fuzz to them. This album doesn't really put itself into that black and white, wintry aesthetic that a lot of black metal does, but it is still black metal, and lyrically we're pushing towards coldness. This shows up quite a bit in this genre, and it probably is a regional thing, given that black metal comes from, well, actually, this band comes from Germany, though. Is Germany a wintry, snowy area? When I think of black metal, I think of like Nordic countries. It's probably really chilly. Lots of snow, long winters. It makes sense that the music would craft a sound around that. Germany, though, I don't really think about that too much. Maybe there's snow. Maybe they're just emulating the sounds of where a lot of black metal. In fact, have we listened to German black metal before? Again, it's just not an area I expect black metal to come from. It's interesting how I kind of create these associations with music based off of, where my experience with it, where the bands come from, what kind of topics get brought up in lyrics often. Those associations aren't definitive. Anyways, we've gone way off topic. I don't know how we got derailed here. There's a storm, and this person is going through the storm, going through fields of sorrow. I think that between the isolation of the storm and this feeling of constant pain, this sorrow, I think that's where I got most of the loneliness from it. Because I don't think it ever actually states that they're alone, but it's the vibe I get. It says that they're a restless soul bound to the eternal jail of life, and they long for freedom. So once again, a track about our narrator wanting death, or bringing about death. That death is just really common on this album. It says that their soul is guided through the night, and that darkness shall rise, and that he's dedicated to the night. And it kind of lines up with what we saw on track 2. More of an expansion of that, but also maybe the wants or needs of this character as well. Whereas track 2, we just saw them aligned with death and bringing death. But here we actually see that it's not just an aligning, it's a want. They wish for death themselves. Lovely stuff. All right. We have a midpoint interlude here going into track 6. Let's check out both of these. Very interesting. I found that track to be one of the least dynamic ones so far. The opening riff did have the ABAC pattern to it, and as soon as I went to point it out, they had changed riffs. And from this point on, most of the riffs embodied a much shorter idea where 75% of it was one concept, and then we had a small movement at the end. Such as that bum ba dum ba dum ba dum ba dum ba da 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 da. Have that little shift at the end of it, but most of it is just this one idea. Rather than breaking it up into quarters and exploring something new every quarter, you take up 3 quarters on one idea, and then you put your punctuating concept at the end of it. Now, we did see a bunch of rhythmic changes at the beginning. We had 3 riffs almost back to back that all used the same 3 intervals, but did different things with them. Sometimes going up and then just holding on to it. Sometimes it was that a rising and cascading thing. A lot of variation there, but still not changing too much with the structure. 75% on one idea, and then the looping idea, the punctuating idea to wrap the phrase up. So we didn't have much in the realm of dynamic riffage. I also found that the riffs themselves just kind of focused in too much. I would have liked something more out of it. And honestly, I think as far as the guitar writing goes, this is the most atmospheric, might be the word I use. It just focuses the least amount on melodic writing. And I think I would definitely take track 3 or 4 over this one as far as just riffs go. The drumming was also a bit more straightforward, but the drums are fairly straightforward this entire album. I did miss some of the cymbal work that we had from track 4 though. The vocals were as dynamic as ever. I still really appreciate what the vocals are doing. And I'd like to hear more black metal that's more dynamic like this, less monotone with the vocals. Although, again, that's a personal thing. I've seen some of y'all's your retorts on that and how you enjoy the monotony of the vocals. I can see the perspective. It's not one I share, but I can understand your point of view on it. I did write down something really interesting though, and it's going to tie into the end of this track as well. We're going to talk about the guitar solos. I noticed something on this guitar solo that I began thinking about previous tracks, and I don't know if it's 100% true because, well, we're almost 2 hours into this discussion, and it's quite possible that I'm forgetting 1 or 2 solos that didn't do this, but for the most part, there is a brightness to the guitar solos. Part of it is the timbre. The guitar tone itself isn't as cold. Has a little bit of warmth to it. It's also centered, which brings our attention to it a little bit more than the walls of guitar we have on the sides. But also when you look at the notes being played, the harmonies explored through the melodic devices, it's one that feels a bit more optimistic. I wouldn't say it's massively different. It does still use like 80% of the same notes as these guitars out to the side do, but it's those 20% difference that it changes it just a hair bit. I've been trying to place it because most of this album to me has felt rather black metal-y. I kind of associate a bit of dreariness to it, but to be completely honest, I don't really feel dreariness too much in the chords of most black metal. I associate that mostly because of the sound and the lyrical themes that tend to accompany them. And I've kind of attributed that. But as far as what I expect harmonically out of dreary music, this is not it. This is too aggressive, I think, for dreariness. It's certainly not positive. It is a bit on the negative side, but I don't have a word to really describe how black metal makes me feel. Aggression and sorrow don't usually go hand in hand for me. Aggression is more of it's a bravado, and sorrow, sadness, loneliness, that's vulnerability. They're two opposites for me. I don't normally associate those two feelings, and black metal tries to pair them. And like I said, I don't have a nice word to kind of describe that. But there is hope, I think, in the lead solos on this. I find that to be really interesting. Looking at the lyrics, I can only assume that this hope is death. It's for the darkness to take over and our narrator to escape their prison life, as they put it. What were the exact words there? A jail of life. That was the term right there. That non-existence is the light at the end of their tunnel. But I did hear it in both of the solos on this track. A little bit of an uptick in emotion, not necessarily energy, but a positivity shining through. I thought that was kind of interesting. There's something else though. The lead guitar at the end of this track played linear melody. I do think it's funny. I just got done talking about how I wanted this, and here we have it. It's a little awkward at the end of it. It just randomly fades out, but not a natural fade out of strumming and then allowing the tone to just naturally taper off. It's ramped down. There's a I'm mad at myself. Why can't I remember this? Linear is straight line. What is a curved line? A curved graph, I should say. Exponential. There we go. I was going to be mad if I forgot that. There's an exponential decay to it, where we kind of have the last couple of notes being played and they're present until they're not. And it's a little bit of a decrease of the volume, and then it just tapers off real quick. And it's this fast fall off, and it feels so unnatural, like someone just is on the knob, just, I wasn't too big of a fan of that. And it made the entire end of this track feel awkward, because the end of the song kind of wraps up that same way too. The solo is the end. And a little disappointed there as I'm finally getting this linear melody. I'm enjoying the story that this melody is telling me. It's got nice pacing, nice flow. We have some highs, we have some lows. It gets more intense with faster playing, then slows down and gives us these longer, drawn out emotive notes. I'm like, yeah, dude, I'm digging this. It's not mind-blowing, but I'm going to take it. This is the strong melodic writing they've had on the riffs so far, but it doesn't loop on itself. It does call back to itself, which I thought was pretty cool. It's a short idea. Callbacks are kind of unusual in such a short melody, but you know what? I'll take it. It's still pretty cool. And then it just fumbles the ending, and the entire song just kind of falls apart in the final moment. So double-edged sword there, I guess. This was what I was asking for on track 2, was just, stronger ending and better melodic writing. I got one of them. Still kind of an awkward ending though. The other tracks have ended well, I suppose. And here I am, just like at the end of track 2's analysis, completely forgetting to talk about the interlude, which I guess it's because, just like Vigr, track 1, it's there. It's got a cool atmosphere. The bass, I dig hearing bass isolation. Like I mentioned during the reaction, this album does have bass presence. It's just not super strong, and it's also just doubling up something else. Doubling up the guitars, doubling up the bass kick. It doesn't do anything by itself, at least not that I've heard. But it was nice to hear a lead melodic idea coming out of the bass there. I thought that was awesome. And the sub bass was very cool. It is lower than the sub bass we had on Vigr. I wonder if the final track, Valr, is going to have even lower bassiness to it. Am I even going to be able to feel that one? These headphones, they have a nice bass presence, but I mean, they're still budget headphones. They're not going to be able to get the super low stuff. And then my ears are kind of trash for bass anyways. All those years of concert going and loud music in the car. Kids, turn your music down if you want your ears to last. A PSA from the Critical Man. Yeah, I'm just interested to see if that's just a coincidence here, if that's a pattern they're going to go through. Because they could have this element of descent then, as they reach their end at the end of this album, which is what they've been asking for this whole time. I also notice a pattern on these instrumental tracks. We have Vigr, Galdr, and Valr. All of them are missing that final vowel though. So like Vigr just ends in GR rather than GOR. Valr, the last one, ends in LR rather than LOR, I think, for Valor. LER? One of those I always get mixed up on. I don't know what Galdr is, though. I don't know what vowel should be there at all, because that's not an English word. The other two probably aren't designed to be English words either, but they're close enough to a word we have in English. Also, the missing vowel might be because it's in a different language where that vowel doesn't exist there anyways. I don't know, maybe I'll go look that up. I will go look that up when I check for lyrics right here. Anyways, though, the instrumental bit is fine. It gives us a nice break. I think it's cool that, like every 15 or 20 minutes, we get a break. We start off with a low point. We have a low point in the middle. 20 minutes later, we're probably going to end on a low point. It's a nice way to take an album that is consistently high intensity and give us these breaks. Now, personally, I'd like them within the song, get a little bit of pacing going on in the structure, but I'll take the pacing in the album too, because we've had albums that just runs at a 10 the entire time, and I am wiped out by the end of those. So it's nice to have some breaks in here. Although I guess it's just one break, isn't it? The other two instrumentals are to kick it off and to wrap it up. So, all right. Lyrics and possibly translations of some of these titles. All right, so a little bit more understanding here. These are all old Norse words. For track 1, it's not Vigr as I had read it, but it's actually Wiga, which means in fighting condition. So actually does kind of line up with Vigr. But you know, marching troops in that opening track make a lot of sense. Now, track 5 here, what we just listened to, the pronunciation, it might be something along the lines of Galdr. It is a spell or incantation, usually performed for certain rites, which, you know, for the moodiness and atmosphere of that track, once again, it checks out. And here, I think I spoiled myself. If you don't want to know about this, skip forward like 30 seconds or so. But the final track, it's not Valor. It's going to be something close to Valr, which means the dead, slain in battle. Specifically, it's a corpse from a battlefield. I think that tells us how this album's going to, how it's going to end. All right, so that's kind of cleared up a little bit in the narrative of this story. This track, dedicated to the night, Høst du ville kraft. The title, I think, is in German, but the lyrics are in Norwegian. Once again, lots of, oh, you know what? This is a German band, but a lot of this is in Norwegian too. I wonder if some of the band members are from Norway. Maybe they moved to Germany and the band formed there. I don't know. We're gonna have to look more into that. Next lyrical break, I'll take to do a little bit of context research here. Anyways, it talks about a personification of autumn, which I think is really interesting because while we didn't have a personification of winter, we did see a winter storm and the destructive nature of that. Here it states Life Taker, Fog Bringer, Wizard and Father of Thunder, Storm Caller, Rain Spinner, War Power and Mother of Darkness, Swamp Dampener, Cold Giver, Golden Dream and Silent Death, Cloud Hunter, Color Bearer, the Power of Time and the Slave of Time. Autumn, you wild power, we conjure you, we call upon you. Well, if Galdr is a spell of some sort, or some sort of incantation, I think starting off with that energy and then moving into this track and conjuring up autumn. Yeah, okay, that checks out. I see how these two are bouncing off of each other thematically. But it calls autumn a life taker. It calls it a rain spinner, a cold giver, which... again, Florida, I don't really get that, but the swamp dampener, I do get. Autumn is a humid season, and it is terrible. So many memories of heading out at Halloween and just sweating as we trick or treat or something like that. Being in like full costume and just melting in the humidity. But it does call it a color bearer, which makes sense. The leaves change color and fall to the ground. And it's the power of time and the slave of time. Autumn comes every year. It has no control over that. It comes after summer, before winter. But it also is the power of time. It is the decaying of nature. Autumn comes around and trees die. Leaves fall. Rebirth happens later. In spring, but autumn has control over this, but is also a slave to time. I think that's just a really cool way to describe all of this. And then it says, come sorcery, bend tops, undress trees, cover the earth with fruit, leaves, and berries. Yeah. This is just a nice song that describes autumn and says, I want this to happen right now. We call you to appear and put the leaves on the floor. I don't know for what purpose, but it does fit within this track's focus on darkness and death in particular, of wanting the trees to be dead, to bring the fruit and put it onto the ground. Interesting. Like I said, thematically in the right realm, but not really nihilistic. It's the first one on here that hasn't really been, life is terrible, take me from this plane. So, curious how it fits into everything else. All right, this next track is called Pest. Let's kick it.
Come and fall.
You know, I honestly thought that was going to roll into the next track with how close that got to the end there. All right. Yeah, dude, this is interesting. This is what I want out of my black metal. And I noticed something interesting in here too. We had clean vocals. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I didn't think we were gonna. I mean, we have one track to go. Mm, we technically have the outro. That's only 90 seconds. We have one more full length track to go. And now they're dropping cleans. But this actually put something into perspective for me. I forgot that Vigr and Galdr also had clean vocals in them. Granted, it was more of... Oh, you know what it is, though? Okay, so they're more atmospheric. Almost like chanting style of vocals. They're also not emphasized as much in the mix, but now that I think about them... Well, see, here's okay. I got a lot of thoughts. I'm trying to organize things. I kind of wrote them off because I think I also couldn't find lyrics to them, and they're de-emphasized in the mix a bit. And they're also female cleans. I kind of wrote them off as maybe a supporting vocalist. But after hearing the cleans in here, they're very close to what we heard in Vigr and Galdr. And then I started to hear the timbre also show up in the harshes. I think they're all the same vocalist. That's interesting. I think black metal has a very distinct style of harsh that kind of disguises any sort of gender texture to them. Like when it comes to like hardcore punk, metalcore, alternative metal, it's easier to hear the gender of someone in the harsh vocal too. In that there's for a majority of vocalists, I could probably determine their gender by their harsh vocal. And I don't think that's true here. And I think it's because a lot of black metal is really shrill screaming, which generally speaking, you don't really attribute too much to masculine vocalists. But black metal's a bit of an outlier, sort of like emo also having higher pitched screams to it, done by traditionally men in emo. So I think it's pretty interesting how black metal kind of shares that, and it kind of obscures the ability to determine who's singing it. I started thinking about like other female-led black metal groups, and we only checked out like one or two of them. I remember one we checked out and I was like, dude, this is actually pretty good black metal. And then, you know, they were problematic people. So I don't remember what band that was, but every time I kind of enjoy black metal, there's a pretty good chance the people aren't great. There's just something about well-written black metal and like veering into Nazi ideology in the lyrics. I don't know what it is. If I like them though, they're usually not great. And I think that's it. Have we listened to any other female-led black metal groups? I don't know. So it's kind of interesting here that feminine clean vocal, and I can kind of hear a bit of their vocal timbre in the harshes, but I think if I hadn't have heard those cleans, I would have just assumed this was another black metal band with a guy on vocals, because that's what so much of what I'm exposed to with black metal ends up being. I could be wrong on this. I'm going to go check that out right now when we break for lyrics, but yeah. Very interesting conclusion to draw here at the end of the album. Maybe I've taken a bit of this for granted, just being more traditional black metal stuff, melodic black metal at that, but yeah. I wonder if there... I think I will. I'll go back and listen to Vigr and Galdr again and give it a little bit more of a focus on the lyric, because it's only like 2 minutes total, 3 minutes maybe tops. I want to see if there's anything else I can glean from the vocal performance, because like I said earlier, I just kind of wrote it off as generic feminine vocals to put in your black metal to make it sound, I don't know, a little softer in those parts, but assuming that it's the lead vocalist, I want to give them a little bit more of a critical ear rather than just, because some metal albums, right? They'll just put in some random feminine vocals in your intro. Or, some of them, they do violins in the intro and they never come back later. It's not the band doing it. It's just a sound they wanted during these interludes or intros to do something different, to do something that sounds cool. But I don't think that's what's happening here. And because of that, I might have discounted some of the vocal work on those 2 tracks, assuming it was just extra non-metal stuff to put in your metal album. But after reading what these words meant, they actually line up a little bit more, and maybe the vocal work lined up too. I couldn't find lyrics for either of those, though. And also Valr. I have no lyrics for that. Metal Archives doesn't have them, and can't really find lyrics for this album anywhere else. So I'm curious what's going on with those. Maybe the band themselves haven't posted the lyrics for those. Maybe it's not in a normal language. How do you talk? I was going to say, maybe it was in a made up language, but all language is made up. So, you guys know what I mean though, right? Like maybe it's not in English or German or Norwegian or whatever else. I know we have Danish coming up on the next track, so 4 languages on this, but maybe there's also some made up languages for those 2 tracks. I'm not sure. Oh, for those 3, yeah. I know that we haven't found, or I didn't find any for Valr as well. I don't know, I'm kind of interested in those. Otherwise, this track is really interesting, not just because we bring the energy down, not just because we have some clean vocals, not just because it caught my attention and made me realize that maybe one vocalist has been doing all of this, but there's a lot of tempo shifts in this one. And time feels too. We've kind of had that in the past, the drummer moving from quarter notes to eighth notes to 16th notes, ramping up intensity without changing the tempo. But this song's just bouncing all over the place. We have really hard stops to create lurches, either forward, like we're being pushed into a new speed, or like a gut punch and we're just randomly slowing down and we're not ready for that. We also have accelerandos, speeding things up. We have retardandos, speeding things down, slowing things down over time. And both of these help create these feelings of movement throughout this track. It doesn't want to stay still at all. I'm really curious what the lyrics are on this one, because it's the only one we've had so far that's done this. And I guess on the temporal side, we've kind of seen this. Track 6. Was it track 6 or track 4? One of those we had a 3/4 time signature on, which was an anomaly on the album. And the other one, I think 6 was the one with the 3/4, and 4 was the one that had 5-bar phrases, which also are an anomaly. We haven't seen that anywhere else here. This one is just temporally, tempo all over the place. It's slowing up, it's speeding down. I can't even talk about it right. It's just all over the place. And I find it really interesting to listen to, but beyond that, the drummer's also all over the place too. And not just with the usual rigid quarter notes, eighth notes, 16th notes, but also syncopation. We haven't had any drumming syncopation aside from the ride cymbal stuff we saw on track 3. We haven't had that kind of syncopation anywhere else on here. And so to get these punky drum parts on this, they're really fun. They're really bouncy. You just kind of want to dance to it. Dancing to black metal, to me, it doesn't happen too often. Mostly when there's some fun cymbal stuff or when we get these punky syncopated bass and snare stuff going on. We kind of got a little bit of a lot of stuff on this one. A little dash of everything as far as rhythm goes. And it felt like a roller coaster just getting thrashed around, which is so different from the rest of this album, which, again, I'm not saying I'm getting bored with, but a lot of this album just, it does its thing. It locks in and explores that. And this one's just, it's like being thrown all around. And I found that to be really interesting. This one winds up being a bit more progressive. Maybe not necessarily experimental or progressive black metal, but compared to the rest of the album, this one was exploring a lot of stuff. It also gave us our only track so far with a lull, a diminished point in the track, gave us clean vocals. So I'm on board for this. This was very fun. But I'm so intrigued about the themes of it because it is so different. So let's dive into some lyrics. All right, a couple of things here. The lead vocalist is a woman, which again is pretty cool. You don't see that too often in black metal. Oh, I remember the other one now. It wasn't in English, and I don't think the title was in English either. And it translated to like midwife or something. If editor Bryan can find it, I'll put a link up there. Y'all can check that reaction out. So this is my third, I think, black metal band with the female lead on it. We then have a lead guitarist, a drummer, and a bassist. The lead vocalist also does guitar work and wrote the lyrics. And then on track 6, track 6. Whoa! Okay, so on Galdr, we have a guest musician, Sophie Smith, doing vocals. This says Galdr is track 6. I have Galdr as track 5. Oh. Give me 1 second. So on the Bandcamp version, and I'm going to assume physical media, track 5 is Helvegen, a Wardruna cover, which we've heard that track. I think we've heard the original, but we've also heard a cover of it. This would have been another cover that we had listened to. And that wraps up side A for the vinyl. Side B starts with Galdr and goes through Valr, just like this. But on streaming, the cover isn't there. It's only a 9-track album on streaming. I checked Spotify. I'm using Deezer. I checked Tidal. 9 tracks on all of them. I'm not going to include the cover, 1, because we're way past its place, and 2, because it almost feels like a bonus. Especially since they purposefully don't include it in the streaming ones anyways. You think if it was important to the themes or maybe a narrative to the album, it would be on everywhere that you would be able to listen to it, they would have included it. But also because we've heard Helvegen before multiple times. And given that I know their style, I don't really expect a lot of differences between some of the other blackened adjacent covers we've heard of it and what they're going to do. Although maybe they would have had a cool melodic twist on it. Still, we're at the end of the album. And it is a cover. So we're just going to continue on. This one's called Pest. It took us a while, but we wrapped around to Judeo-Christianity. The pest is Christ. I don't... It was the funniest thing. Also, the lyrics in here are wild. I don't think y'all are ready for this. It starts off with a chant. Lucifer, come and rest. Lucifer, come and fight. Lucifer, bless this night. So we're calling upon Satan to help. It says, after all, a new sun will arise, a glance in the morning sky, the rebirth of earth, the bringer of a new time. That checks out. You know, the darkness is kind of vague, but the darkness of Lucifer. Yeah, that and black metal goes really well together. Not just being an advocate and warrior of the darkness, but an advocate of Satan himself. Okay, that checks out. Then it talks, though, about this being a perfect night to slaughter the unborn Christ. What? It says we're going to rip it apart and abort the bastard. Like I said, wild. Yeah, I mean, even, you know, from this angle, right, for this narrator, Christ is a villain to be defeated. And, you know, there's time travel stories of going back in time and killing people before they could grow up to do a really notoriously bad deed, like all of the stories about going back and killing baby Hitler. But I think it takes it one step further, not just to kill the child, but to abort it. Abort the pregnancy of this person. It's just... what? And it's not funny, right? This is not a comical thing, but it's so absurd. It could have just been that this is the night we go back and kill baby Jesus before he gets a chance to, you know, do anything with his life. But no, we're going to abort him instead. It's just, how do you come to this lyrically, narratively? How does, I know people's minds all work differently. I don't think I would have ever come to this story beat, though. This is bonkers. But I do love this subversion of going back in time and murdering Jesus, who, at least from, you know, the church's perspective, is a hero of the story. I think that's a fun subversion too, because usually people go back in time to, you know, kill obviously evil people. But through their perspective, Christ is like this complete undoing and terrible force on the world. So like, I get it, but it's also fun because it's subversive. And then it's extremely absurd, and that just adds a comical layer to it. And honestly, I can't take this track seriously. Oh, geez. When it was called Pest, I was going to expect a track about how people are annoying and that the silence of non-existence would be better than dealing with these pests. But no, the pest is Christ. Again, I don't think this is supposed to be a funny track. I don't think it's supposed to be comical, but y'all know I have a really weird sense of humor. And this just... I think I needed that. Just a bit of a laugh during this album. Also, nothing in this track relates back to the music. I don't feel the intensity shifting. I don't feel the temporal shifting. The fun dancey bits on the drum with the punky stuff. Yeah, I don't know. I was so lost on this track. Blasphemy, but I think it's my favorite one of the album so far. Let's dive into the final 10 minutes here with the tracks Ere the World Falls and Valr.
Lost fire close. It's Durchschlagen, Schwesel und Dampf auf Flammenhaus.
Something became a bit clear for me listening to this. Endings on this album haven't been great, and I've just been kind of sweeping it under the rug, but I think there's actually a very strong case to be made about execution versus intention on this. I think that overall, this track clearly states what this album, clearly states what its intentions are. To create a dark, twisting narrative as we follow one person through their battle as they wage war for Lucifer, looking towards the end of time so that they can find peace. I don't know if it's supposed to be a concept album in this overarching narrative, but it can be read that way. Aside from one of the tracks, it was Høst du ville kraft, the autumn one. I still don't know how to work that one into everything. I think it still comes from the perspective of the narrator, but it stands out a little bit from the rest as far as theming. It's kind of a low point where everything else is death, death. Also, I'd like some fruit on the floor. Autumn, please, do that for me. Let these trees drop their fruit. And death, death. it's an awkward little middle point there, but there's probably some perspective to see how that works in. And like I said, we are still talking about the death of the trees, which is why the fruit falls anyways. That it's still conceptually tied together, even if it feels like a lightening of intensity. But I'm not sure that the execution actually works. Most of these tracks do have a bit of dark bite to them, the typical metal aggression that you're going to get, but overwhelming hatred of life never really comes through in the music. I feel it's too listenable, too palatable for that. The vocals have distress in them, especially some of the higher pitched ones that really evoke a sort of pain, but not all of the lyrics are based around pain. And that might be one thing where being more familiar with this and realizing when she uses those vocals for what certain passages makes more sense. And that's like a normal music thing. That's nothing specific to this. Being able to know when sounds appear in the story is going to add to your understanding of it. But beyond that, I don't really get any of this nihilism in the music, other than the fact that I associate the black metal sound with nihilism. Harmonically, I think if you applied this to a string quartet or something, I don't necessarily think that these sounds would be evoked. I don't think that people would walk away from this thinking that someone wants death, that life is overwhelming for them, and that it's incredibly lonely, and they just wish for the peace and silence of what comes next. So emotionally, I don't think it ticks the box on that one. And the endings to many of these songs, I'm going to say half of them, kind of just don't work. They're very abrupt. They're awkward. You had that weird fade out at the end of, was it Dedicated to the Night? I think it was. And then Ere the World Falls. Maybe the world falls, which is why the song just ends in a snap. But then we get Valr, and there's wind. There's the sounds of like observing a battlefield. So the world hasn't ended. We still have music showcasing this. I think it would have felt more natural to find a way to smoothly move between these, to come from the high intensity into the silence of the battlefield being empty now, as every single person on it is dead. But then we have this somber little guitar line at the end of Valr, which, yeah, you know what? I think that embodies the sorrow of this, the loss of everything. But that doesn't fit with the narrator's perspective. So whose perspective are we viewing this emotion from? Because honestly, this should be victorious. This is what the narrator's been fighting for. The only possible thing is that the narrator's still alive here. But there's nothing in the text to support that. But even that riff itself is cut way too short. We have this awkward silence lead up, so we lose 5 seconds there, and it stops about 45 seconds into the track, so we can have this wind sample fade out on the end of the album. And so we don't really get to spend time with this moment either. It's just sort of, hey, this was a sad moment and scene. And it feels rushed because of that. The thing is I'm being hard on it right now, but it's because the bones are solid. There's a lot of fantastic ideas in here, and I think as far as maybe they just wanted to make a black metal album and these just happen to be the lyrical themes to it, maybe it's one of those cases where there's not supposed to be an emotional overlap, a thematic connectivity between these two halves, but black metal does a really good job at evoking and diving into nihilistic themes sonically. So it's like, it's right there. That connection could have easily been made, and it almost feels purposeful then, but given some of the albeit amateurish decisions throughout the album, makes me feel like it was just a missed opportunity. At the same time, though, this is a very unique sound within black metal. It's clear, it focuses on melody, there's positive elements to it. I can't really think of too many black metal bands that I've heard that I think would line up with this, with the vocal expressiveness, with the guitar expressiveness, with the brightness and warmth on the guitar tones at times. It's not really heavy and oppressive. So is all of this intentional or not? I don't know. I wasn't there in the creation process. I like to give bands the benefit of the doubt, though. But what I hear is an album that's just on the cusp of pulling everything together into a really unified work of art and sort of just missing the mark. It ended up being a fine black metal album. A solid 7 out of 10 or something. But just a couple of little changes in the editing process, and it really could have been an 8 or a 9 by pulling everything together. And it's just kind of missing those small little adjustments, which I'm going to tell you, they're really easy to overlook, especially when you're close to the project. I'm not sitting up here and saying that this was easy to notice. Anyone could have, seen these discrepancies. The thing is when you're making it, these are the things that are easiest to overlook. But I have the benefit of distance from it. I've never heard any of this before. I have no preformed ideas about what these riffs are supposed to sound like, what they're supposed to contribute to. When you've been there through the creation process, and this is true in filmmaking, in art, in dance, in any art form, the closer you are to it, the more time you spend with it, the harder it is to see the small things. And the thing is too, is that there's always so many small things. They tell you that getting up to like 90% done is the first half, and the second half is getting from 90 to 100%. The reality is nothing ever gets finished at 100%. You just reach a point where you have to cut your losses and say, well, this is now the finished product, because you'll never hit 100. It's impossible. Nothing can ever be perfect. So I'm not looking down on them because of what I see as a couple of small issues. This is just, I guess, constructive criticism. If this was more in line with their vision, something to look forward to on a future album. And if it's not, they can just discard it. This guy doesn't know what he's talking about. We didn't want any of that at all. Screw him. Art's subjective. And I've made it pretty clear up to this point that this isn't necessarily my cup of tea anyways, but I think from as objective as a stance as I can make on this, I do think that it misses the mark in a couple of very small ways that would have had huge sweeping elevations to it to just make it feel like a more full product. Product's a terrible word, a better work of art. I hate calling art products. Dang, my voice is getting a little hoarse here. Anything else I want to add to this? We did get a little bit more clean vocals in here. I thought that was pretty cool, but I don't think that the 8.5 minute song really justified its length. It felt a little long for me. And part of that may be that it's the end of the album too, and the album's starting to feel a little long for me. I'm not the audience for it. If you enjoy black metal, how did you feel about this? This being the longest track on the album, did it feel too long? I felt there was more repetition in here than normal, but again, some people really like repetition, especially if the riffs are solid. So a subjective note there once again. I think it's going to wrap this one up. We had some fun drum parts on this one, but overall, it's called The World Falls. It's the final track. I kind of assumed it was going to be a bit larger to hit a peak for the album to end on a high note. And the problem that these albums have where they just run at full intensity all the time is you can't go above full. And so what should be the end of the world sounds like the norm. And this is the problem I talk about with music that doesn't use dynamics, particularly with intensity and volume, is that eventually your 10 is going to feel like a 5. It becomes the norm, but you can't go above it. You lose your headroom there. So I think that's why dynamic elements are really important. And I'll give them the credit here. Galdr does bring the energy, or Galdr does bring the energy down a little bit. We have a little moment there. And then track 7 and 8 both had some low points to it. So there is a little bit more contrast back here in the last half. It isn't enough. It isn't enough to reset my sense of norm. And so the heightened part still just kind of feels like the album. And you can't get above that because it's already running out of 10. It doesn't feel like the end of the world to me. They could have done this harmonically, though, since volume and layering weren't on the table. Although we did have the dual vocals and guitars, and that did feel intense. I thought that was a really nice way to kick off this track. But by the end of the track, we're back to the norm. So we even had a little bit of a layering peak, and we backed down from there, making it feel even more of a norm. But we could have had... what's the term I want? Oh, harmonic peak here too, adding more dissonance or intensity to the chord progressions on this one. And that would have helped it feel a little more apocalyptic. But also from the perspective of the narrator, this is the prophecy. This is the good stuff. This is what they've been waiting for. And we don't get any of the happiness in here either, or at least even a feeling of normalcy, of having that bite and the metallic edge removed just a bit. So, yeah, this last track just didn't really hit for me. And I've already talked about Valr and my issues with that one. It's a small missed opportunity. I think it does the right thing, though. It showcases with sound and sample an end, a silent end of the world. It's just, again, the difference between idea and execution. Let me hit some lyrics for Ere the World Falls, and then we're going to wrap this one up. Okay, so this is about the world falling, descending into fire. Half of this is in English, the other half is in Danish. Now, the English part, though, is very clear. It says, fire crawls its path, burning all flesh. All lives are to rest in the fire, and the fire devours the night. I have an instant issue with this. If from the start we were a disciple of the Lord of Darkness, I think I'd be okay with this. But we weren't. We were a warrior of the darkness. We were spreading nightfall across the world, and this lined up really well with the element of death, that non-existence is just blackness. Really cool thematic layering there. But here at the very end, we work with fire, which is light. It even says that we devour the night, which is a visual shift that I don't think pans out really well. Right at the end, we subvert the visual metaphor we've been using this entire time. Now, aside from that, this works fine. I think it makes it very clear how destructive and fast-moving this army is. But there's also the other part, that the last track called in Lucifer. And I thought, okay, whatever. But this track evokes both the imagery of Ragnarok, as well as talking about Yggdrasil and Surtur too. So now we're mixing mythologies. And the thing is, too, is that we talk about Surtur using the flames of Muspelheim to destroy the land. So is this Lucifer and the Christian hell, brimstone fire coming onto Earth, or is this the Norse Muspelheim, the fires of Muspelheim coming in and destroying the earth. And now we have two muddied elements here. We have our lore getting muddied and we have our visual metaphors getting muddied, and it just creates a final track that doesn't quite work for me. Like I said, on the surface, it's fine. It's fine. The earth gets devoured by fire, everyone dies, and then we get to hear the final track that's just a silent, empty battlefield with the wind blowing. Cool. The story's told, but the thematic devices have been destroyed. And I'm just not a big fan of that, especially when it was pretty cool the way it was set up to start. It does mention, though, that the sun darkens, sinking into the sea of earth. I like this, but once again, it works against what's going on because while the sun is not fire, the sun does provide light and heat just like fire does. And now we're losing that to the night, which was what we wanted originally, but we're actually thematically on the side of fire, of light and warmth right now. So I know I'm nitpicking, right? But that's my job as a critic. I really want bands like this to elevate their work. And once again, they're right on the cusp and lost it right at the end. It's just another little thing that I think would have elevated this entire album. Again, I see like a solid 7 out of 10 here. I don't really have a lot of big, large complaints. It's well done from start to finish. But it could have been a 9 or a 10 out of 10 with a little bit of tweaks here and there, just to bring it all together and turn it into a really strong work of art. The end, though, I had mentioned Ragnarok. It says axe time, sword time, shields are split, wind time, war time before the worlds fall. An all-out battle before the end of the planet. I'm pretty sure that's Ragnarok. I don't know how Surtur fits into Ragnarok. It's been a long time since I've read those myths, but I don't know. Maybe the flames of Muspelheim destroying the earth as warriors fight is part of that. It vaguely rings a bell, but again, it's been so long. He does say, though, that all bodies will burn, all thoughts will disappear, that evil is on earth. Brothers will be broken, walls will be destroyed, and no man will survive another. It does say, though, that mountain trolls will stand tall. I guess the trolls survive. I think that's interesting too, because we haven't really had any mythological elements up to this point. We've had, a vague element of darkness, but that can be swept away as a metaphor. Lucifer, and going back in time to abort Christ. We're definitely playing around with some more fantastical elements here. So I guess by this point, mountain trolls, they're just, you just kind of accept that. But I do think it was rooted in the first half. Even the incantation for autumn, I don't think was too far out of place, because it didn't imply that it worked. It just implied there was a ritual that went on. And so it keeps it rooted and even kind of historical in that sense. It's really only track 7 and 8 that really flip the script on me and take something that feels rooted and grounded with some heightened elements and some strong metaphor and turn it into a full-on fantasy story, while also abandoning the visual metaphors they've been working with. And I think that's why it just doesn't click for me. And then the music being as long as it is, and Waller being a bit of a letdown in a narrative wrapping up of the album, it's just a cherry on this disappointment cake. Really solid offering up to this, though. Tracks 1 through 6 are, I really, again, don't have really many issues with. Little nitpicks here and there. It just never sticks the landing, unfortunately. But these are just my thoughts. on Nornir's Skuld. What did you think of this? Is there anything that stood out to you? Anything that you'd like to add on to what I said or correct me on? Do you have your own take, perspective, or opinion on this track? Let me know. Put all of that, as well as anything else you'd like to add, into the comment section below. Above that, in the description box, is a link to Linktree. Takes you here. You can find links to my music, ways to support the channel, a link to the Discord server, and so much more. Above that, if you could, like, subscribe, and ring the bell. I greatly appreciate all three of those. That wraps it up for today. I'll be back tomorrow, though. Tomorrow is that way. 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, 4 p.m. UTC. As we do on Sundays, we're going to have a live stream. It's usually like 2.5 hours. Just chill, lots of good conversations, some good music. It is a laid-back, cool way to chat with people, chat with other like-minded individuals who are open-minded about music, and hear some good tunes, maybe even some new stuff you've never heard before. Otherwise, y'all know the drill. Monday at 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, I'll be back with next week's reactions. Until next time, remember to be critical, not cynical, of the music you listen to, and have a fantastic morning, afternoon, or evening, whenever you choose to watch my videos.